When I saw my son's best friend holding his tools and calling me, I couldn't resist. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the channel, where we bring you real tales of infidelity. In today's episode, I'm going to share the story of how I fell for my son's best friend, even though I'm a married woman. My name is Marcia, I'm 50 years old, and I'm married to Robert, who is 55. We live in Miami and have a very stable life, both financially and emotionally. We've been married for 30 years, and the greatest love of my life is our son, George. He's 25 and about to graduate with a degree in nutrition. His dream is to work with world-renowned bodybuilders, a passion that he developed thanks to the world he grew up in. You see, I've been a fitness influencer for many years. I can't reveal my identity for obvious reasons, but I'm quite well known. I record content for social media, review supplements, train at different gyms, and share my experiences. I've participated in both national and international events that you may have seen on YouTube or TV. Naturally, George grew up immersed in this environment, which inspired his own aspirations. At first, Robert was very jealous, especially when I posted videos of myself working out or showing off my physique. We had many arguments about it. He didn't fully understand the demands of my career or why I had to expose myself that way. Over time, though, he came around, and now he supports me, even though every now and then that jealousy still shows. Our marriage has had its ups and downs, but ultimately, love and respect always win out. Robert used to be a long-haul truck driver, traveling across the country. But when I started to gain more fame, I convinced him to leave that job and join me as my assistant and manager. Although, truth be told, he doesn't have much to manage. The financial gap between us became large, which bothered him at first, but eventually he got used to it. Even though I'm very active and meticulous about my health, I began to notice a significant difference between Robert and me. I've always eaten well, exercised regularly, and used supplements and personalized treatments, so I look much younger than my age. People often say I look like I'm in my 30s. However, Robert is no longer able to satisfy me. Our intimate moments end quickly, and most times things don't even get started. This began to weigh on me heavily. Through my work, I've met and talked to many different men. More and more, I started to notice how they noticed me. Compliments, double entendres, long stares. It became common. I found myself daydreaming about certain men with their sculpted bodies and imagining things I had never considered before. Despite these thoughts, I always told myself I would never cheat on Robert. Fidelity was a principle I cherished. But temptation grew too strong, and eventually I gave in. Now, before you think I fell for some muscular, gym-going guy I work with every day, the truth is far different. It all began at a party I threw to celebrate a major contract I'd signed. It was a small, intimate gathering with only close friends and family. That night, my son George brought his best friend, Dominic. The two of them study nutrition together and have been inseparable since the start of college. Until then, Dominic was just a name I'd heard in conversation, but I had never met him in person. When he walked into the party, I was instantly drawn to him. I can't quite explain it, but there was something about Dominic that sparked an unexpected attraction in me. It was as if a fire had been lit. I was looking my best that night. After all the hard work I put into maintaining my body, I had chosen a white, form-fitting dress that highlighted every curve, making me feel like a goddess. When I posted a picture online, it blew up with likes and comments, praising my beauty. But when Robert saw me, he simply said, "You look nice," and gave me a quick peck on the cheek. After all the effort I put into looking flawless, his basic comment left me feeling deflated. I brushed off the disappointment, determined to enjoy the party. But when George introduced me to Dominic, everything changed. Dominic had dark, curly hair, a strong physique, and striking green eyes that seemed to twinkle in contrast with his tan skin. When our eyes met, he smiled, and that smile completely disarmed me. I felt an electric connection. Throughout the night, we found ourselves talking more. George left us alone while he got ready, so Dominic and I sat by the grill, surrounded by the beautifully arranged party decorations. His compliments flowed easily, but there was something more to them, an undeniable spark. I couldn't help but push the conversation in a more playful direction, testing the waters. I leaned closer, making a sly comment. "You don't strike me as someone who watches my videos just for the fitness tips." Dominic's laughter was soft, and he responded with a smile that made my heart race. Well, there's definitely more to it than that. As the night wore on, and after a few drinks, the atmosphere between us grew more intimate. When the party finally came to an end and the rain began to pour, George insisted that Dominic stay the night due to the weather. We all moved inside, where the mood became cozier, more relaxed. After my son and his girlfriend went to bed, Dominic and I were left alone in the dimly lit living room. The tension between us was palpable. Eventually, Dominic broke the silence with a soft, almost seductive voice. "You seem a little tense. Everything okay?" I tried to brush it off, but the truth was, I wasn't okay. I was tempted, pulled into something I knew I shouldn't want, but couldn't resist. He offered me a massage, claiming he was good at easing tension. I hesitated, but agreed, knowing full well what was about to happen. What followed was an intense connection that neither of us could ignore. His hands on my shoulders led to a moment of pure vulnerability, and before I knew it, we were locked in a passionate embrace, something I hadn't experienced in years. The night with Dominic was unforgettable, and though I returned to my bed beside Robert, my mind was racing. In the morning, Dominic was gone, but he left me a message thanking me for the night and suggesting we take a trip together. A trip for just the two of us. I agreed, knowing full well the risk involved. I've never felt this way before, and now I'm at a crossroads. Should I pursue this passion with Dominic and find the happiness I've been craving? Or should I stay with my husband and keep things as they are? Let me know what you think in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more real-life stories. After agreeing to the trip with Dominic, I couldn't shake the excitement, though it was mixed with guilt. For days, I found myself checking my phone constantly, waiting for messages from him. Each time he texted me, my heart raced and I couldn't help but smile. His words were a mix of flirty banter and genuine interest. It was a dangerous game we were playing, and yet I couldn't stop. In the weeks leading up to our trip to Salvador, I tried to act normal at home. Robert, oblivious to my inner turmoil, continued his usual routines. He trusted me completely, perhaps too much. I would catch myself watching him, wondering how he could be so content with the life we had, while I felt something missing. I still loved him in a way, but it wasn't the same love that once burned brightly. It had dulled, become routine. On the morning of our departure, I packed my bags under the pretense of heading out for a work-related trip. I told Robert I'd be helping a friend with her social media following, something he didn't question at all. As I kissed him goodbye, a pang of guilt hit me, but it quickly faded as I thought about the adventure awaiting me with Dominic. Dominic and I met at the airport, our excitement barely contained. The flight to Salvador felt electric. Every glance, every touch seemed to promise more than we had already experienced. By the time we landed, it was clear this trip would change everything. We checked into a small boutique hotel by the beach. The view was breathtaking, but I hardly noticed. My mind was on Dominic, on the pull I felt toward him. The minute we were alone in our room, the tension that had been building since that night at my party exploded into passion. Our days were spent exploring the vibrant streets of Salvador, but the nights were where the real exploration happened. Dominic was everything I hadn't realized I'd been missing. The intensity of our connection was intoxicating, and for the first time in years, I felt alive, free. Yet, in the back of my mind, I knew this couldn't last. I knew this was temporary. As the days passed, I found myself torn. The carefree moments with Dominic were thrilling, but the reality of my life back home loomed over me like a storm cloud. Robert had called a few times, and I answered each time, keeping my voice steady, pretending everything was fine. Each conversation reminded me of the life I was leading, a life I was slowly unraveling. One evening, after another day of exploring and indulging in each other, Dominic and I sat on the balcony of our hotel room, watching the sunset over the ocean. It was beautiful, almost surreal. He turned to me, a serious look in his eyes. "Marcia," he began, his voice soft but steady. "I know this trip has been amazing and I don't regret a single moment, but what happens next? I know you're married and I'm not trying to make things harder for you, but I can't pretend this doesn't mean something to me." I stared at him, my heart pounding. I had known this conversation was coming, but I wasn't prepared for it. Dominic was young, full of life and hope, while I was caught between two worlds, one of comfort and routine, and one of passion and excitement. How could I choose? "I don't know," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the sound of the waves crashing against the shore. "I wish I had an answer for you, Dominic. This has been incredible, but I have a life back home, a husband, a son. I can't just walk away from all of that." He nodded, but I could see the disappointment in his eyes. "I understand," he said quietly, turning back to the sunset. "But I need you to know something, Marcia. I care about you. This isn't just some fling for me." I felt a lump forming in my throat. I cared about him too, more than I had anticipated. But could I really leave everything behind for someone who, despite our connection, was still a stranger in so many ways? The rest of the evening passed in a blur of conflicting emotions. As much as I wanted to stay in this bubble with Dominic, reality was closing in. We spent the night wrapped in each other's arms, but the unspoken tension was there. We both knew this couldn't last forever. The next morning, as we packed our bags to leave Salvador, I felt the weight of the decisions I had to make. I knew I couldn't keep living like this, caught between two worlds, two loves. Something had to give. But what? Back home, Robert greeted me with the same warmth he always had, unaware of the internal storm raging inside me. Everything felt the same, yet nothing was. My mind was still in Salvador, still with Dominic. I thought about his offer, about the life I could have if I chose to be with him. But then I thought about George, about my family, about everything I had built over the years. Weeks passed, and I continued to text Dominic, but something had shifted. He was growing impatient, and I couldn't blame him. He wanted more, and I didn't know if I could give it to him. My heart was torn, and I found myself unable to make a decision. Then, one evening, as I sat alone in my room, I received a message from Dominic. It was simple, but it hit me harder than I expected. "I can't keep waiting for you, Marcia. You have to decide. It's either me or your old life." I stared at the message, feeling the weight of those words pressing down on me. I knew he was right. I had been selfish, trying to have both lives without fully committing to either, but now I had to choose. And as I sat there, the realization hit me. No matter what choice I made, I was going to lose something. The question was, what was I willing to give up? I stared at Dominic's message, my heart pounding. I had been balancing on the edge of a precipice for weeks, knowing that one wrong move would send everything crashing down. And now, here it was, the moment of truth. I had to choose. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every memory of my time with Dominic replayed in my mind, the stolen glances, the electric conversations, the passionate nights. But then, I thought of Robert. Our life together wasn't perfect, but we had built a family, shared decades of memories, and weathered many storms. Could I really walk away from all of that? The next morning, I sat across from Robert at the breakfast table. He was reading the newspaper, just like he always did. The routine was so familiar, but now it felt foreign. I couldn't help but think about how different my life with Dominic had been. It was exciting, unpredictable, and filled with passion, everything my marriage had lost. As Robert lowered the paper and smiled at me, oblivious to the inner battle I was waging, I realized I couldn't live like this anymore. I couldn't keep deceiving him. I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine when I knew it wasn't. And I couldn't keep stringing Dominic along, knowing that he deserved better than the uncertainty I was offering him. But I wasn't ready to make a final decision just yet. I needed time. Time to sort out my feelings. Time to understand what I truly wanted. So I picked up my phone and sent a message to Dominic. I need more time. I can't make a decision like this so quickly. His response came almost immediately. I understand, but I can't wait forever, Marcia. I hope you find what you're looking for. After that, things between us became more distant. We still texted, but the spark that had once been there had dimmed. Dominic wasn't willing to stay in limbo, and I couldn't blame him. I had asked too much of him, his patience, his heart, and now he was pulling away. Days turned into weeks, and I threw myself into my work. I spent more time at the gym, more time creating content, trying to distract myself from the growing tension at home. Robert noticed my restlessness, but he didn't ask. Maybe he was afraid of the answer, or maybe he didn't care as much as I had thought. The quiet between us grew, but I was too afraid to break it. One evening, after a long day of work, I came home to find Robert sitting at the dining table, a look of concern on his face. "Marcia, we need to talk," he said, his voice steady but serious. I froze, my heart racing. Had he found out about Dominic? Had he noticed the distance between us? "About what?" I asked, trying to sound casual, but my voice betrayed me. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a mix of sadness and frustration. "Something's been off for a while now. You're different, distant. I don't know what's going on, but I can feel it. Is there someone else?" The question hung in the air, heavy with tension. I wanted to lie, to deny everything, but I couldn't. Not anymore. I had been living in this limbo for too long, and it was time to face the consequences of my actions. I took a deep breath and sat down across from him. "Robert, there is something I need to tell you." The words felt like they were tearing out of me as I spoke. I told him about Dominic, about the party, the attraction, and the trip to Salvador. I told him about the passion that had reignited something in me that I thought was long gone. And I told him how I was torn between the life we had built together and this new connection with Dominic. Robert sat in silence as I spoke, his face unreadable. When I finished, the silence stretched on, the weight of my confession filling the room. I didn't know what to expect, a fight, tears, accusations. But what I didn't expect was the calm that followed. After what felt like an eternity, Robert finally spoke, his voice quiet but steady. "Marcia, I've known something was wrong for a while now. I didn't want to admit it, but deep down I knew. I just didn't know how to fix it." His words caught me off guard. "Fix it," I repeated, my voice trembling. He nodded. "We've been drifting apart for a long time. I'm not blind to that. And I guess part of me thought that maybe you had found someone else. I didn't want to face it." Tears welled up in my eyes as I looked at him. "Robert, I never meant for this to happen. I never wanted to hurt you. I know," he said softly. "But we can't ignore it anymore. We've both been pretending for too long." The room fell silent again as we sat there, the reality of our situation sinking in. For so long, I had been trying to decide between two lives, but now I realized that neither option was simple. No matter what I chose, there would be pain. "I don't know what to do," I whispered, my voice breaking. Robert reached across the table and took my hand, his touch gentle but firm. "Maybe we need some time apart to figure out what we really want." His words hit me like a punch to the gut. Time apart? Was that the answer? Could we really come back from this? "I don't want to lose you," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I don't want to lose you either," Robert replied, his voice thick with emotion. "But we've both lost something along the way, and maybe the only way to find it again is to take a step back." The tears finally spilled over as I realized the truth in his words. We had been holding on to a marriage that had lost its spark, and now we were at a crossroads. I didn't know if time apart would save us or push us further away, but it felt like the only option left. And so, we agreed to separate for a while, to give ourselves the space to figure out what we truly wanted. I moved out, renting a small apartment nearby. Robert stayed in the house, and for the first time in decades, we lived separate lives. As the days turned into weeks, I thought a lot about Dominic. He had been the catalyst for this change. But now, with the distance between us, I wasn't sure if he was part of my future. Our messages became fewer and farther between, and I began to realize that maybe Dominic had been more of a wake-up call than a long-term solution. Eventually, I stopped hearing from him altogether. I wasn't surprised. He had wanted something more, something I wasn't ready to give, and maybe that was for the best. As for Robert and me, we continued to stay in touch, carefully navigating our new reality. I didn't know if we would find our way back to each other or if this was the beginning of the end. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was finally facing the truth, no matter how painful it was. And that, I realized, was the first step toward whatever was next. The weeks of separation stretched on, and each day felt like I was peeling back layers of my old life. At first, the silence was deafening. No more routine. Mornings with Robert, no more pretending everything was fine. I had space now, time to think, to reflect. But the freedom I had craved felt hollow. I kept up appearances, diving deeper into my fitness content. I attended more events, posted more videos, and threw myself into the role of influencer. A world where the surface is polished and perfect, but beneath it all, I was unraveling. I thought about Dominic often, wondering if he had moved on, or if he thought of me the way I still thought of him. A part of me missed him, but the more I thought about our whirlwind affair, the more I realized it had been an escape from a marriage that had grown cold, and from a version of myself I didn't want to face. Robert and I kept in touch, though our conversations were short, practical. We didn't discuss the details of our separation, nor did we touch the subject of whether we would reunite. Instead, it was logistics, checking in on George, discussing finances, mundane updates. But beneath every interaction was an unspoken question. Is this it? Is this the end? One weekend, I decided to take a walk by the beach, the same one where Dominic and I had shared so many moments during our trip to Salvador. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow across the water. As I walked, I replayed every step of the past few months in my mind. Dominic's smile, Robert's heartbreak, my own confusion. I sat down on the sand, staring out at the horizon. I had wanted so badly to feel alive again, to recapture the passion that had been missing from my life. But in the process, I had hurt the person who had stood by my side for 30 years. I had betrayed not just Robert, but myself. The woman I had once been, the one who believed in loyalty, in love that could survive anything, felt like a stranger now. As the waves crashed against the shore, I realized something. No matter how much I wanted to run away, I couldn't escape myself. I couldn't fill the hole, emptiness I felt inside with someone else, with a passionate affair or a thrilling escape. The problem wasn't just my marriage, it was me. I had changed, and so had Robert. But instead of facing those changes, I had sought an easy way out. Suddenly, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Robert. "Can we meet? I think we need to talk." My heart skipped a beat. It had been weeks since we had talked about anything real, anything that mattered. I stared at the message for a long time before replying, "Yes, when?" He suggested we meet at a small cafe near the beach, a place we used to visit when George was little. As I walked toward the cafe later that day, I felt a mixture of anxiety and anticipation. This conversation could change everything. When I arrived, Robert was already there, sitting at a table by the window. He looked older, more tired than I remembered, but there was a calmness in his eyes that I hadn't seen in a long time. I sat down across from him, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. "I'm glad you came," he said softly. "I'm glad you asked me," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. He took a deep breath, then looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen in months. Honesty. "Marsha, I've had a lot of time to think, and I want to say I'm sorry." My eyes widened in surprise. "Sorry? For what?" "For letting things get to this point," he said, his voice filled with regret. for not paying attention to the cracks that were forming between us. I didn't see how unhappy you were, and I didn't do enough to fix it. Tears stung the corners of my eyes. I had been bracing myself for anger, for resentment, but instead, Robert was offering something I hadn't expected: accountability. "I'm sorry too," I said, my voice shaky. "I should have told you how I was feeling. I should have talked to you instead of running away." He nodded, and for a moment, we sat in silence, letting the weight of our shared mistakes settle between us. "Do you think," Robert began, his voice hesitant, "do you think there's still a chance for us? I mean, after everything?" The question hung in the air, heavy with uncertainty. I had asked myself the same thing 1,000 times. Could we rebuild what had been broken? Could we find our way back to each other after all that had happened? "I don't know," I admitted, tears finally spilling over. "I don't know if we can ever go back to how things were." Robert reached across the table and took my hand, his grip firm but gentle. "Maybe we're not supposed to go back to how things were. Maybe we need to start over, build something new." I looked at him, seeing the man I had loved for so long, the man I had built a life with. He wasn't perfect, and neither was I. But for the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of hope. "Do you think that's possible?" I asked, my voice trembling. "I think it's worth trying," he replied, his eyes filled with a sincerity that brought a fresh wave of tears to my eyes. "We've been through too much to just give up without giving it one last shot." I squeezed his hand, and for the first time in months, I felt a sense of peace. I didn't know what the future held for us, but I knew one thing: I wasn't ready to let go just yet. Over the next few weeks, Robert and I took things slow. We agreed to start seeing a marriage counselor, something we probably should have done years ago. We talked more, really talked, about the things we had both been avoiding for so long. And while it wasn't easy, it felt like progress. As for Dominic, I sent him one final message, thanking him for everything, but telling him that I couldn't continue our relationship. He responded graciously, wishing me the best, but I knew that chapter of my life was closed. Dominic had been a wake-up call, a reminder of what I had been missing, but he wasn't the answer. I needed to find that within myself and in my marriage. Months passed, and little by little, Robert and I began to rebuild. It wasn't the same as it had been before, but maybe that was a good thing. We were both different now, and in many ways, we were stronger for it. One day, as we sat together on the porch, watching the sunset, Robert turned to me and smiled. "You know," he said, "I think we're going to be okay." I smiled back, my heart full of hope. "Yeah," I agreed, "I think we will be." And for the first time in a long time, I truly believed it.